to talk about what went wrong here and the differences between these two crashes. One is a low side on landing and the other one is a high side on landing. But before we go into that, we're going to talk about how to control the attitude of the bike in the air and how it's important to take off with the right attitude whenever possible so that you can make changes in the air safely to try to avoid these crashes or at least minimize the damage on crash. So in the first crash, that's me. I go off the tabletop. Don't try to over jump it or anything. I'm just going around a slightly slower rider. When I go over the face of the jump, I roll off the throttle to keep the front end lower than or level to the rear of the bike, which is usually the best way to take a jump, especially if it's got a downside landing. So when I take off, the rear of the bike goes out to the side a little bit, which isn't a big deal. All you have to do in this situation is get on the gas as you land the motorcycle so the rear wheel is spinning. The force of gravity drives the rear wheel down into the ground, straightens out the bike, and pulls you out of a crash situation in almost all cases, unlike this one, of course. So that's what I do. I jump, the bike goes a little bit sideways, nothing drastic whatsoever, I mean just the tiniest bit. I get on the throttle, land, and I'm guessing the combination of a very hard packed dirt with like a soft, slippery surface, and the fact that I am on a Supermoto and I'm not on a dirt bike with knobbies, and I have full slicks, Bridgestone slicks actually, in case you're wondering, which don't have any grooves cut into them. I just didn't get any traction on landing, which has never happened to me before in my life. I've been riding dirt bikes for over 35 years. Anytime I've been out of shape, way worse than this situation on much bigger jumps, I always can save it by just opening the throttle on landing and having the bike adjust itself under power. So the other crash, if you look at it closely on replay, you can see a couple things went wrong here. First of all, this guy's a really good rider. He knows what he's doing. I was riding behind him before this crash happened. He definitely knows how to ride. He definitely knows how to jump. You know, these are dirt bikes. We're on a changing surface. Sometimes there's, you know, a little rock or a rut or something, and it sends the bike out in a direction that you're not anticipating. And the only way to not crash is to be in a good position or the best possible position to be able to make changes in the air, which unfortunately in this case, it didn't work out. So what happens when he goes off the jump is you can see the attitude of the bike is nose high. So that's going to limit you in being able to apply full throttle to fix any mistakes, because when you apply full throttle in the air, it lifts your front wheel. If you tap the rear brake, stopping the rear wheel in the air, it'll lower your front wheel. If you get on the gas in the air, it'll raise your front wheel. But because his front wheel is already high, he's already nose high when he's coming into this landing. If he opens the throttle too early, he's just going to loop out on landing. And of course, that's not going to be good. I'm guessing, you know, in a millisecond, he decided not to open the throttle wide open before he landed. And then that's why the bike didn't straighten out, which causes him to high side. So this is the same jump. This is 2 sessions back to back. My crash was first, and then the next session I went out and I was following him, and then he did this high side crash. So it's a good illustration of the differences. Being on wide open throttle when you land versus not being on wide open throttle while you land if you're in a sideways bike situation. I will take my crash over his crash. Low sides are much safer. Rarely get injured on low sides compared to high sides. High sides are much more violent. I mean, you can just see by footage of his crash that he totally gets tossed and slammed into the ground and flipped all over the place. His bike got hammered. And if it wasn't for Greg being right next to me when I crashed on my low side, literally nothing would have happened. My bike was totally fine. I didn't get hurt at all. Unfortunately, you know, he was next to me when I low-sided, which propelled my bike directly into his wheels and took him down, slammed him on the ground. So that's not cool, of course, but you know, it's dangerous out here and shit happens sometimes. And he wasn't seriously injured, which is great. But if you consider the alternative, like let's say I landed in the exact same fashion of the other guy's crash. So let's say I jumped, I got sideways in the air, I didn't get on full throttle, therefore I'm not going to low side, right? But I'm going to high side. So if you look at the footage and see where the guy that high sided ended up, the level of impact that would have happened between him and the other rider that I actually ran into, if you were there, it would have been much, much worse. I mean, the bike would have made contact with Greg's leg instead of the wheels of his motorcycle, maybe snap his tibia in half or something, and then it would have been like body to body contact between the two riders, you know, or body to Greg's bike. You know, if I would have high-sided into Greg like that, my body would have probably slammed into Greg's bike instead of just sliding down onto the ground softly. So, you know, 999 times out of 1,000, if you're out of shape in the air and you're not already nose high, which you shouldn't be anyway, open the throttle, hold on, and the bike will adjust itself as you land. The rear wheel will get traction and drive you out into a straight line instead of tossing you to the ground on a high side, which is what normally happens. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that there were other factors involved in my low side. For instance, this is very hard packed dirt. It's got a very slippery surface on top of it, and I'm on slick tires, so I have no traction compared to a dirt bike. And these Bridgestone slicks, they don't have grooves cut into them like Metzler's do. I'm pretty sure if I had Metzler's on, it wouldn't have been the same result, but you know, I'm just speculating at this point. Anything's possible. And like I said, I mean, sometimes just shit happens. Maybe there's a little rock there that stops your contact patch from getting totally flat on the ground, or whatever. You know, it's a colder day, there's less traction than normal. Anything can make random shit go wrong when you're out here on a motorcycle and, you know, flying through the air on a 230, 240 pound bike, especially if you don't have tires that are specifically designed for that purpose. So thankfully nobody was hurt. And yeah, so even though this happened the way it happened, I will do this exact same thing every single time. I'm never gonna not open the throttle on landing unless there's some reason not to. Like, you know, the other guy that crashed, he was already nose high. Maybe he thought if he opened the throttle, it was just gonna be worse, which is a possibility. But for the most part, if you're nose low or your tires are totally level as you're coming down on the landing, you can open the throttle on landing. Not only does it straighten you out, it stops your suspension from bottoming so easy, and it gets you driving in the right direction. So instead of all that weight getting thrown forward as you land, which is what happens if you land without throttle open, and then you're taking all that effort to basically do a push-up to stop your weight from going forward as you hit the ground. As you land with full throttle, usually you can land, the bike kind of rows out from underneath you, so you're using your back muscles and your legs to absorb the impact, and the bike will track straight, and you'll pull right out of the jump without any issues.